Once again, it is Halloween, and I love me some ghost stories. I promise you, I'm very close to finishing the next Kitchen Nightmares video, but I recently heard some ghost stories that I've heard passed around multiple times in the past, and I got really curious about if there was any factual, provable truth to them, or if they're just fun ghost stories. People love ghost stories, and the only thing they love more than ghost stories is a guy on the internet ruining them by actually investigating the claims that they make. Just to be 100% clear, even if there isn't any actual evidence for these stories, or if they're definitely proven to be false, I can still appreciate them as fun campfire stories. I just won't believe that they actually happened. So without further ado, what I'm going to do is tell you the original story, and then I'll do some investigating and see if I can track down any factual basis for them. Both of these stories were featured on a channel that I'm a fan of and regularly watch called Mr. Ballin. I'm going to summarize the stories to some degree for time, but if you want to hear someone tell them much more eloquently, then go check out his channel. The first story is about a woman in Reno, Nevada whose husband John passed away. The woman was living alone, and at some point she started calling 911 and asking for help with mundane things like boiling water. The 911 operators must have either thought she had dementia or they just couldn't be bothered to punish her for misusing 911 services, so each time she called they would explain that 911 is for emergencies only and they would end the call. She would continue to call 911 however, but at some point she started asking for her husband John and trying to talk to him, who again was deceased. Each time she called, the operator did the same thing. They explained that the line is for emergencies only and they didn't send anybody out to her because it wasn't a real emergency. But one day she called 911 and said, "John, please come home. Help me. I need help. John, come home." And this time they did send responders to her house to check on her since she was so frantic on the call and saying that she needed help. When they got to the house, the door was unlocked and they went inside. It was totally quiet and they started searching the house. They didn't find anybody until they got to the woman's bedroom where they found her deceased. Where things start to get weird is when the responders noticed that the woman had apparently been dead for too long to have made the 911 call that brought them there based on the fact that rigor mortis had set in. But upon hearing this, the 911 operator insisted that it was her they talked to on the phone and that they were sure because they had grown very familiar with her after getting so many calls. Allegedly, the house was very cold, so they assumed that maybe the low temperature had made her seem like she'd been deceased for longer than she actually had. But then it gets even weirder. A few days later, 911 receives another call from that same address. The operator takes the call and is shocked to hear the same woman on the other end asking for her husband John to come and save her. The operator tries to get more info, but the call is cut off abruptly. I guess phone service in the afterlife is really shitty. The operator sends first responders to the house again, and when they show up, the house is totally empty and nobody's there. The next day, the same exact thing happens. Call comes in, gets cut off, and the operator sends first responders. And again, the house is empty. The calls continue to come in for a period of several months. Eventually, the woman's house burns to the ground and still the calls come in. The police even get in touch with the phone company who confirms that they cut off her phone service very soon after she died. And they even sent a guy out to double check and confirm that it was disconnected. Finally, about a year after the woman's death, the calls finally stopped. And that's how the story ends. Nobody knows who or what made the calls. It's admittedly a pretty creepy story, but is there any truth to it? If the story has any factual basis, then there should be mountains of 911 call recordings and probably some news reports about it, right? Now you might be expecting me to just say that it's bullshit, but hold your horses, let me show you what I found. First of all, I was unable to find any news reports about this specific story or any recordings of the alleged 911 calls. So where did the story come from then? Well, I did find this exact same story on r/scary stories, and it's pretty much a one-to-one copy of the story from the Mr. Ballin video. That Mr. Ballin video that tells the story is actually a retelling of the story that was originally told by Mr. Ballin in a video from 2020, which was much earlier than the Reddit post. So it looks like the Redditor almost certainly got the story from Mr. Ballin and just retold it. I did reach out to Mr. Ballin to ask where he got the original story from, but as of yet I haven't heard back from him, which isn't all that surprising. The guy probably gets thousands of emails per day. Another potential source for this story that I found is an internet mystery called The Case of Olivia Mabel. A YouTuber called Pagan Valley did a deep dive on that story, so if you want to hear all about that, then go check them out. But to summarize, this bizarre story popped up online about a woman whose son died tragically. The woman then went insane and turned to dark magic. One day the police got a 911 call from her home, and when they showed up, they found her long deceased. Sounds pretty similar, right? According to Pagan Valley, that entire story and all the images and audio recordings associated with it turned out to all be fake. It was all part of a viral marketing campaign for a movie called Thought Form that was apparently never made. This seems like a pretty good candidate for the inspiration for the story. I mentioned before that I didn't find any news evidence for that specific story, but I did find news evidence for another story that's very similar. This article comes from CBS and it reads, Pueblo, Colorado. It's not unusual for police dispatchers to answer 911 calls only to have the caller hang up. It happened in Pueblo earlier this month. But what happened next may strike some as a little spooky. On August 11th, the Pueblo Police Department Communications Center got what they refer to as an abandoned 911 call at 3:28 a.m. According to police, the call came from Imperial Memorial Gardens, a funeral home and cemetery located at 5450 West State Highway 78. An emergency services dispatcher answered the phone just as the line disconnected, but received no response from anyone on the line, police stated. An officer was sent to check it out, and the dispatcher called the number. Police documents show the call was answered, but no one spoke. It was just static. Officers went to check out the funeral home, but it was locked up and dark, with no one in sight. Probably just line trouble, right? Let's go with that, Captain Tom Rummel told the Pueblo chieftain. And here is the actual audio from that 911 call.
Pueblo 911, this is Erica. How can I help you? Hello? Hello? Hello?
That news report is from 2018, and the earliest mention that I could find of the original story was in that Mr. Ballin video titled Top 3 Scariest Audio Recordings Halloween Scare-a-thon Part 4. So that news report could have been the inspiration for the story. I'm not implying that Mr. Ballin saw that news report and just made up the story on his own or anything, but the source that he got the story from could have potentially done that. But either way, it's a pretty creepy story. The second story that I want to take a look at is the story of the haunting of the Capitol Theater in Salt Lake City, Utah. To make a long story short, security guards and law enforcement, and other employees for that matter, have reportedly experienced a lot of very hard to explain occurrences in the Capitol Theater. The Sci-Fi Channel actually did a series called Paranormal Witness, and in one episode they covered the Capitol Theater. They even had interviews with the security guards and employees that were making the claims. Some claimed to have heard people whispering when they were all alone, others heard doors slamming only to find nobody there. In one reported incident, 2 security guards invited a friend to go on a tour of the theater at night after it was closed to the public. While they were looking around, they saw a bathroom door slam closed on its own, and the handle started shaking vigorously. When they opened the door to the bathroom to confront the intruder, there was nobody inside. Another incident was reported by an employee. He claims that he was working late at night in his office and there was nobody else in the building. Suddenly, he heard the loud elevator motor turn on, and the elevator moved from the basement floor to the floor that he was on. He thought it was strange because there was supposed to be nobody else in the building. When the elevator got to the floor he was on, the doors opened and there was nobody inside. And then the doors wouldn't close and an alarm sounded indicating that something was blocking the doors. He got up, walked over to the elevator, stepped inside, and then the doors closed and the basement button illuminated as if it was pushed. He rolled the elevator down to the basement, stepped out briefly, and after not seeing anyone down there, he hurriedly took it back up to his office and tried to get back to work. Then a short while later, he saw the drawers of a heavy filing cabinet open and slam close on their own, and he was unable to replicate it by seeing if they would just close normally on their own. There were several other mysterious things that security reported seeing, like a piano playing on its own only to stop when the guard got close to it, a hooded figure seen sitting in the auditorium when it was supposed to be empty, and multiple people reported smelling smoke when there was no apparent fire. The security officers attribute the smell of smoke and the hauntings to a fire that supposedly took place at the theater in the 50s. The story goes that a fire took place and everybody managed to escape except for one young usher who died. The security guards believe that the ghost haunting the theater is that of the young usher. So, is there any truth to this story? Well, I did find a newspaper article from the Wilmington Morning Star dated 1949 that mentions the fire at the theater and the fact that only a young usher was killed. I also looked up all the names of the people who were witnesses in the sci-fi show episode. I wasn't able to find info on all of them, but I was able to confirm that some of them were definitely real people, not actors, and some of the security guards had LinkedIn accounts that showed them working security at the time that the alleged incidents took place, which was 2006. So basically, there definitely was a fire there that claimed one person's life, and we also have several real people who worked there who claim to have witnessed unusual activity. But it's important to remember that eyewitness testimony is not irrefutable proof. But I also can't just outright discount their testimony. For my money, I think that these claims are interesting, but I'm not 100% convinced that they're real without some better evidence. Something else that I always wonder about when hearing these ghost stories, especially the more recent ones, is where's the video footage? If I saw some weird shit happening right in front of me, the first thing I'm doing is pulling out my phone and recording it. I know that these events took place in 2006, but cell phones were a thing. The Motorola Razr was out at the time, and it had a camera on it. And what about the security cam footage? They mention all the security cameras that cover every area of the theater multiple times in the sci-fi episode. If all the different happenings really took place, then there should be ample footage of it, right? And the last thing that I found about this story is this article from Deseret News about some renovations that were done to the theater in 2019. Here is a quote from the article. That episode aired 7 years ago, and Cammy Monk is certain the hauntings are a thing of the past. There has been talk through the years that there's a ghost here. I've not had any experience with the ghost, and it's not something we usually highlight when we talk about Capitol Theater, said Monk, the communications manager for Salt Lake County Arts and Culture. But I don't think that he's with us anymore. So maybe the ghost sightings were real, or maybe they were just the result of overactive imaginations. I really wish I could go on a night tour with one of the guards and film the whole thing, but I doubt that's gonna happen. And that concludes the video. After looking at both of these stories and digging into the facts behind them, I can say that I definitively proved that we are no closer to having definitive proof of the existence or non-existence of ghosts. If you want to see more videos like this where I look into ghost stories, let me know in the comments. Maybe it can become like a yearly Halloween tradition or something. Also, since it is Halloween, I guess this is a good time to mention that I started a side channel where I play horror video games. Don't worry, I'm still putting the exact same amount of time into this channel that I have been. The game that I just got done playing is called Haunting Ground. It's a PlayStation 2 survival horror game from Capcom, who's best known for making Resident Evil. But I don't think as many people know about Haunting Ground. It's considered by some to be a hidden gem, so I had to see if it was any good. So if you want to see me play horror games badly, then come check it out. Thank you so much for watching the video, and hopefully I will see you in the next one.